Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Heretic Hammer podcast. I am your host, Marshall, and this is my co-host, Dylan.
Hello, hello.
And welcome to the last episode of the Heretic Hammer podcast. You know, it's been a good run. We made it through, but unfortunately, after this episode, we are going to die.
It's good. It's good.
Yep.
Honestly, it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, you know, and unfortunately, that is going to be because we are now going to be on brand fully as heretics for the knowledge that is of the Grey Knights. So we'll obviously get into why that's a joke in a minute. But first, what are the Grey Knights? Because they look a lot like Space Marines, and we already did a Space Marines episode, didn't we? I think so. I think it was that second episode.
Maybe a little while ago. Yeah, maybe.
And you know, inherently you could call them, you know, a second founding chapter of Space Marines, which wouldn't technically be wrong, right? But unlike what a commenter believed in said Space Marines episode, it's like thinking that the Black Templars are technically not a sub-faction. You know, they are a second founding Space Marine faction of the Imperial Fists in the Black Templars, which would technically make them a sub-faction, though in the game of Warhammer 40K, they're almost treated as if they are their own faction. They get a own codex supplement and everything. But then you could say the same thing about the Blood Angels, the Dark Angels, the Space Wolves. The Grey Knights are a little bit extra to that because they are special Space Marines, wherein they get their geneseed not from a Primarch, but from the God Emperor himself.
How? How did he pull that off?
Well, the same way that you get geneseed from all the Primarchs, you just get a bunch of DNA of the Emperor that he had stored away, and you take that data and you jam it in some gene splicing that you're already doing to those Space Marines. But instead, you can use that to not only ensure that they essentially that they utilize a lot of their that they're able to properly utilize their psychic gift, but then also make them help make them incredibly loyal. And loyalty not in a like kind of like not in the sense of being like utterly true to the word of the Emperor like the Custodes, but in the sense that they're nigh unbreakable. Like their will is just top tier.
So does that mean they have no weaknesses?
No. Unfortunately, their weakness is kind of that loyalty. Because, like I said, it's not to the same level of the Custodes. Because the way the Custodes are loyal strictly to the Emperor especially, they not only are very knowledgeable of his own word and actual will, the Grey Knights, being Space Marines, don't really have that benefit. And the Grey Knights kind of exist in a special realm, much like a chapter of the Space Marines called the Death Watch. See, in the Inquisition, you have multiple orders, two of which being the Ordo Xenos and the Ordo Malleus. And the Ordo Xenos get their own special Space Marine faction, legion, or chapter is more proper, in the Death Watch, which is a group of Space Marines veteran Space Marines from all of the chapters that exist of Space Marines. And they are banded together to make a super Xenos killing force. But Ordo Malleus is specifically designed to fight the machinations of chaos. And thus the Grey Knights are the demon killers of the Imperium. That is their specialty, and that is where they thrive. They don't need things like, they don't really need, a group like the Sisters of Silence, because they themselves are their own psychic weapon against chaos. The origin. Why do they have their geneseed from the Emperor? Well, there was that time, we talked about it a few times by now. It was that time where a very tall, large, bald man decided, fuck you, Dad. I don't like what you're doing. I'm going to make my own empire with blackjack and hookers and 4 chaos gods to give me a bunch of juiced up power into my skull through a tube.
And it went well.
Yeah, it went really well for all parties, especially the Imperium and the Emperor himself. Nothing happened to the Emperor, except for the fact that just before many things happened, his right-hand man... I hate when my brain does it. It's always when we're recording that my brain is just like... important character you've talked about a bunch of times, or you've seen a bunch of things on, go away. Okay, start that over.
It's like stage fright.
I know.
You don't even have the stage to fall back on. You're just kind of like
So the Emperor's right-hand man, Malkador the Sigillite, a perpetual, much like the Emperor, so inherently a man who would live, who conceptually could live forever and be immortal, because effectively his body can almost kind of like recuperate in some way, was tasked by the Emperor, or kind of, in a way kind of took it upon himself, to find all of the most loyal Space Marines he could, especially those who were psychically gifted, no matter what legion they were in. As long as they were loyal in their heart, he would find them. So if they were of a traitor legion, but they remained loyal and they were psychic, he would find them. And in that, he grabbed them all and he began training them on the moon of Titan. But he felt that they needed time. They needed training. They needed to go into the hyperbolic time chamber.
Yeah.
And so Malkador the Sigillite, this one guy who is immense psychic power, much second to the Emperor, took that whole last moon and sent it into the warp.
The whole moon?
The whole moon.
Did he just do that with psychic power?
Yep.
Or
he was just like,
that was just a thing he could do. He just had that in the back pocket.
Titan was just like, yeet. And in that time, because he had, after implanting, obviously prior to doing that, he had, after implanting all of these Space Marines with these Emperor's geneseed and kind of with this instruction manual, effectively, they emerged many years later from the warp because while it had only been a couple years in real space, because the warp is, like I said, like the hyperbolic time chamber, it had been almost hundreds of years. And now the Grey Knights, with the facilities and the tools and everything they were given to create all the Space Marines that they would need, Titan emerged from the warp back into real space on the proper area that it was, with a full 1,000 Space Marine legion of these psychically gifted, just gray-clad, armored Space Marines, hell-bent on killing hell.
All right, I'm down. I like it.
Yes. Unfortunately, during said Siege of Terra and Horus Heresy, in order to fight Horus, the Emperor had to have Malkador the Sigillite sit on the Golden Throne, which, if you can recall, was currently being used to prevent the entirety of a just gigantic wave of demons that ended up killing 90% of the Custodes at the time, from entering in through the Emperor's palace. But the Emperor needed to go deal with Horus. So Malkador the Sigillite sat on the throne for the Emperor and would die doing so. Like the second when they came back with the Emperor's like borderline corpse to put him back on the throne after the fight with Horus, they essentially had to just like remove his border, like just almost dead body off of the throne and put the emperor on, and then the Malcador is just dead that just dies at that point. It's just like, okay, I have held it as long as I could. Death. So now you have this sudden scenario where you got a lot of perfect demon hunting and killing Space Marines. But now the Emperor and Malcador the Sigillite, the two men who are setting up in charge to try to make this order happen, gone. Barely any instructions outside of the normal Imperial Creed.
Right.
And thus begins forming the Inquisition. As you talked about. And the Inquisition, with their great motto of innocence proves nothing.
Oh.
Clearly has no form of corruption in it whatsoever.
Yeah, not even hiding it. Yeah.
No. And thus they took hold of the chaos fighting Space Marines, especially through the Ordo Malleus, and decided that they would be better set to, bring out the Emperor's will. And this is where one of the downsides of the Grey Knights come from, both from a writing standpoint, a character standpoint, and the flaw in themselves as a whole, right? They are unbreakably loyal, but theirs is especially to the Imperium. While inherently all Space Marines are loyal to the Emperor, they're still inherently loyal to the Imperium more than the Emperor in a way, right? They will always kind of continue to try to follow the Emperor's will, and a lot of things that Space Marines were always running into throughout throughout the 10,000 years from the Horus Heresy to the 41st millennium, was them essentially like continuing to chase through all those Chaos Space Marines and fighting their incursions, all those Black Crusades. And so as a result, now you've got a lot of them kind of being in this wish-wash of whatever, right? That's why you have the Black Templars who exist, who, while every other Space Marine Legion wouldn't really think about worshiping the Emperor as a god still, the Black Templars are the ones who are like, no, we're in on this ecclesiarchy shit.
Yeah.
But they all still maintain a good amount of loyalty, but a lot of it to the Imperium. And so the Grey Knights are no different. So when they end up kind of being like, all right, like we're going to continue the Emperor's will of purging chaos out of the real space, they kind of miss part of the point, right? The Emperor of Mankind, kind of famously banned all religion from the Imperium, right? And this was twofold. He had seen the many years in history of religious fanaticism resulting in a war and conflict, right? Also, because he had been alive since Mesopotamia times, right? So he's seen a lot of it.
Yeah.
But then also he knows of the existence of chaos, and that any form of religion is a great vessel for the chaos gods to come in and find their way into it. And no better example than that is of Lorgar and his homeworld, where they had worshipped a religion that was very much disguised to them, unknowingly to them, to just be a straight up chaos religion of the four chaos gods.
Mm-hmm.
But they just weren't aware of this aspect. So then, how did the Grey Knights come into this? Well, now we have to get into a time called the Months of Shame. And this comes right after the first war for Armageddon. We talked about Armageddon. The orcs loved to fight there.
Yeah.
But in the first war for Armageddon, instead, great World Eaters leader Angron decided he was going to try to take it out because he knew the importance of this planet to the Imperium. It involves a lot of resources. It has a large amount of hive cities. It's a beacon of imperial strength. So take it out, obviously, strategic mind would say. So here's the thing. So this inevitably the war, especially the war against Angron, became kind of a three-pronged fight from the Imperium in the Imperial Guard, the Space Wolves, and the Grey Knights. But the Grey Knights, being led by Inquisitors, ran into a snag. See, again, the Emperor didn't want the general populace to know of chaos. So the Inquisition took this to say, if anybody knows of chaos, it's a dangerous door that is now left open in their minds. Therefore, the only way to remove that potential portal from, that potential portal of a demon is to just murder them. So they had ordered the planet, despite that only a small portion of it, and about well over 90% of the population had no idea that this war even happened. They had ordered the entire planet, the Inquisitors had ordered the entire planet to be sterilized and those who were in the fight to be rounded up and killed. And that eventually the whole planet would just get repopulated from people from other planets and they would just start it over.
I want to say that feels excessive.
Little bit.
But
and you know who also thought that?
Who?
Logan Grimnar of the Space Wolves.
Fair enough.
The Great Wolf of the Space Wolves.
Also, yay, Space Wolves.
Yes. See, this is around when the Space Wolves really started to actually become cool especially after the heresy.
Let's become cool right now.
Yeah. And so Logan Grimnar decided, hey, no, let's not do that.
No, Mad Dog, no.
So he was like, fuck you guys. And when they started to shoot down refugee ships that they were sending out to save them from the Inquisition, Logan decided, okay, we're going to have all of our Space Wolf ships launch with them to create a blockade, essentially, or like a shield to help them get out of the planet's orbit. Well, gotcha. The Inquisitors just with the Grey Knights decided, well, we're just going to shoot them all then. And so they shot the Space Wolves and the refugees alike. But the Space Wolves got reinforcements. And for the first time in this fight, Logan Grimnar teleported onto a ship, killed a bunch of people, teleported back to his ship, and essentially gave them the ability to escape. Well, the Inquisition's calm and reasonable response to this was to have them and the Grey Knights purge any planet that those planets went to go resupply at, completely blowing up the planets and all of their populations.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's the sensible thing to do. And again, the Grey Knights are complicit in all of this. They are following and committing these orders.
You could have just resolved this over a nice brunch, just a company trip to the Panera Bread to, get a quick meal and just kind of talk this out person to person. This feels really, really excessive. I mean, they're like losing at this point. They're just kind of losing track of the original plot, right? Like the reason that they were doing the Inquisition in the first place. Right,
exactly. I mean, look at it this way. Like, this is why the Grey Knights, like, while, like, you can, it's like the classic, kind of philosophical thing about, the people and soldiers of Nazi Germany. Many of them didn't necessarily want to be put in this position. There are people who didn't vote to originally bring Hitler to power. There are soldiers who were in the army before Hitler took control. Mm-hmm. But whether it be to save their own skins and whatnot, they ended up still potentially committing, atrocities or allowing and being complicit to atrocities to happen, while others didn't do so at the risk of their own lives. And again, you can say whether or not there's a philosophical debate on whether or not it, can be forgivable to save your own life and just protect yourself in the time where anybody can be killed, right? Where, despite that certain people are in more danger than others, but when there's many when disagreeing can mean the end of anybody, then what can you do? That's the philosophical question. One you could put in the shoes of the Grey Knights, but let's remind ourselves. The Grey Knights are supposed to be the sons of the Emperor in a way, right? They're supposed to be the best Space Marines. They're supposed to carry out the anti-chaos will of the Emperor. And so if a Grey Knight went to the Emperor and went like, hey, so like we fought some of these chaos, your sons, these demons that your other son brought, and like, we only fought like in a really small part of the planet, so like most of the planet didn't know about it. So we just decided it was best to kill everybody else instead, in order to prevent that small group of people from knowing anything by killing a large group of people. And then we killed millions and millions of more citizens and completely eliminated resource points for our own Imperium just because like we thought that they might have somehow also led to some type of knowledge of chaos out there, because we just can't be too sure. The Emperor would have a fucking conniption.
Yeah, of course.
Like they would have got ass blasted just as far as Horus did. Like, yeah, he didn't want the wider Imperium to know of chaos, but he wouldn't want to throw away resources. But again, the Inquisition had its feelings hurt, and this is a common theme of many Inquisitors, which is why many of them are cool, but many of them are frustrating. And this is a scenario of that. So eventually, the Grey Knights and the Inquisition decide, well, what we're going to do is we're going to go to Fenris, the homeworld of the Space Wolves. We'll bombard the planet and then create a blockade so that they have to surrender. Once again, Logan Grimnar decides, no, you ain't. And when he shows up to Fenris, teleports onto the main Inquisitor's ship, guts down a bunch of the the Grey Knights, not Chaos Space Marines, Grey Knights, that were defending the main Inquisitor, and then beheaded said main Inquisitor. They unfortunately still, in writing for a number of time, kind of still ended up being treated a little bit like the lapdogs of the Inquisition and the Ordo Malleus. They at least start, in some respects, to get a little bit better, but their writing is kind of inconsistent, because they'll run into these scenarios where they'll have stories about this like group of 3 Grey Knights taking down a greater demon, like in receiving no casualties between the 3 of them, and still being uncorrupted. And then you've got a book where where a Grey Knight gets like incapacitated by the presence of a single just plague marine, like a space marine of Nurgle. Not even a greater demon, just like a borderline souped up henchman of Nurgle. One actually fun fact then is many years after the Months of Shame, you've got all of a sudden Magnus deciding, yo, I'm gonna try to get my revenge on the Space Wolves for fucking destroying my planet. And kind of making me turn to chaos and all of that. And I'm going to find a way to create a giant chaos inversion onto Fenris. And in that time, the Grey Knights can come in and help the Space Wolves. And this time, I will note, unfortunately, in this scenario, the Space Wolves and the Grey Knights do ultimately decide that the incursion was big enough that it would actually pose a problem for much of the population of Fenris. And so they do just kind of a lot of the normal folks that kind of had anything to do with around the fighting of Fenris, which isn't very much in the start. It's not like Armageddon, where a fight in one part of the planet means 90% of the rest of the planet doesn't know. There's only 100% of the planet is only on 10% of the planet. So
Yeah, I get you.
Because it's like living in Alaska.
Yeah.
You know, there's only so much hospitable area to live in.
Mm-hmm.
So, unfortunately, they run into a similar scenario, and they actually kind of go through with it, and it's at the behest of the Space Wolves this time. But they get it in this scenario, and they have ways to make it work again and whatnot, and just kind of be able to start over. But yeah, it's a tough aspect. I will note one of the also things is the whole like killing anybody who knows of chaos thing has kind of dampened a bit since the early 41st and 42nd millenniums. And the biggest reason is because of that good old Black Crusade in Cadia. It's really hard to explain why the sky has not only suddenly gotten a gigantic tear through it, but also why a bunch of weird creatures of terrifying magnitude are pouring out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, unfortunately, to all the planets that were around the terror of the Eye of Terror, the Cicatrix Maledictum, you can't eliminate every single one of those planets. You just can't. Gilliman won't allow it. You're going to be dealing with a bunch of political issues from the rest of the Imperium. As much all power that the Inquisition does have, there is a limit, it turns out. Politics still is a real thing. And they are still somewhat beholden to those politics.
Mm-hmm.
Because when there wasn't this giant tear in space, you could get rid of a number of planets and there's still millions left, in the Imperium alone. So, not many people may notice it, especially if it's maybe a little bit more backwatery of a planet. But all of a sudden, when half of the Imperium is cut off to the rest of the Imperium, you need everything you can get. And so all those soldiers of Cadia that survived, inherently, as far as we know, are still around. In fact, there are characters of the guardsmen who were on Cadia and are still fighting today. As far as I can tell, someone can correct me on this because I haven't read her books, but I think one of the characters, for example, is of Minka Lesk. But again, I don't know her books, so I don't know if she is currently alive or not. And wikis are famously not always up to date, so you can let me know. Obviously, maybe you want to put a spoiler tag in the comments for that. But Imperium as a whole, so especially the Grey Knights, have cooled down a lot on that whole not knowing of chaos thing. But there's still plenty of not knowing what the Grey Knights are. But the Grey Knights are often only brought in when it's a really desperate situation. And most of the time, really in those scenarios, there's not really many people left.
So they're almost more of a cleanup crew at that point.
Kind of. It's tough to say. It's just because these incursions are so big. But there are some fun characters when it comes to the Grey Knights. And it really sits into their just complete inability to be corrupted aspect. And one of the first ones I want to talk about, because as far as I know, they're not a named character, but they're a legend. And in this legend, it is of a Grey Knight who found his way in the domain of Slaanesh, the actual realm in chaos of Slaanesh, where we will find another named character of the Grey Knights. But this Grey Knight specifically we're talking about now made his way through the realm of Slaanesh, defeating the demons and resisting everything along the way. All the way up to even getting to the foot, up to the throne of Slaanesh, she who thirsts, the Prince of Pleasure themselves, and buckling a little. It's enough for Slaanesh, but even in that, he was able to hold his will all the way up to that point. That being said, this goes into then the theory of the Purple Knight or the Silver Knight of Slaanesh, which many take to be this Grey Knight. So some people are in somewhat belief that it's kind of somewhat like a Fulgrim. He might be set up in a Fulgrim-like scenario where there was, in Fulgrim's case, right, he was possessed by a demon blade. So when he showed a one moment of weakness, the demon itself kind of took over, right? But this ended up being because, that demon in the blade that he had just was like wearing down at all his insecurities. And so he did that. And so like, and then once he finally broke, the demon just kind of took over and just kind of started more puppeting the body, while Fulgrim's like actual soul was just kind of like kept in a box by this demon in the warp. I would kind of hold the belief that likely because Slaanesh is inherently Slaanesh, and he was one Grey Knight, one's going to just straight up kill Slaanesh when the entirety of the Eldari race has been incapable of doing that for millennia. He got far, but he just couldn't do it. And my guess is that his body is maybe being used for Slaanesh, but his mind is intact somewhere else. I would like to next talk about the Grey Knight Castellan Crow.
Castellan.
You may look at his blade and be like, that's a funky looking blade. Why does it look like that? And well, that is because much like Fulgrim,
I can't see it.
He is in possession of a demonic blade of Slaanesh. I don't know what it is about Grey Knights, but they have so many stories about Slaanesh.
Is Slaanesh just handing these out? Like, are they just? They're just like standing at the entrance. They're just standing at the entrance to the club, just like, hey, before you go in, make sure you put this on.
They're trying to get you hooked. It's like the weed dealer that gives you one for free. Or not even, well, it would be the weed dealer. It'd be,
put on your armband, here's your poppers,
yeah.
Go have fun.
It wouldn't be the weed dealer, it'd be like the Coke dealer. It's like, here's the Coke for free, now I'm going to give you crack after that. Yeah, so Castellan Crow obtained this Slaaneshi blade. And in it is a demon that at every moment that he wields it, beckons him. Use me, use all of my power. Let me touch you. Because, Slaanesh probably placates to very insatiable things. Mm-hmm. And he holds this blade every moment of every day in solitude until he needs to go out into battle, where he will use the blade, but nowhere near to its full extent. Nowhere near to its maximum power, because that would give in to the blade. So he wields it and uses it at a minimum power in a way to spite it, but also to hold it, because he knows that he can withstand this blade's constant machinations. And you would say, why don't you just get rid of it? Why not hide it somewhere? Because a blade cannot fall in the wrong hands if it remains in the right hands.
He's literally studied the blade.
Exactly.
Yeah.
While Slaanesh was out.
While you were out having inquisitions, he studied the blade.
Exactly. So he remains in solitude at all moments. When they're in their ships, when he is traveling, when he is moving with his brothers, he is in solitude. No one is allowed in. No one is allowed to cohort with him except for his brothers. But no serfs, no nothing. Only his brothers. And those, honestly, even it would have to be probably his chapter masters at that point. He is very defensive of the blade, and he holds it tight because he knows that he can master it. But next I'd like to talk to about this guy. So he was once known as Revul or Vito. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Not important.
Revuel or Revuel?
Yeah.
I don't know.
A former Thousand Sons sorcerer. You may ask, why are we talking about a Thousand Sons sorcerer? Well, because Arvida was not aware of the whole goings-on when it came to Prospero. And the burning of Prospero and how the Space Wolves were kind of the unknowledge of them being tricked, stuff like that. And so, Malkador kind of saw his loyalties still holding, because again, he didn't understand why his brothers would turn to chaos, right? And so Malkador took him in, and when they were about to get back to Titan to begin for him to be a part of this Grey Knight founding, he started to fall to the plague that had been befalling all of those 1,000 sons that kind of had originally led to Russ wanting to brand them as, mutants and traitors in what was called the flesh change. It was this affliction that mutated them to such horrid, forms that it would essentially almost turn them into weird flesh demons. Which is the reason that they are dust now, because Ahriman tried to fix that and cure it with this spell that turned all the non-psychically gifted or like powerfully psychically gifted Thousand Sons members to dust. So inherently, him being spared from all that, he had started to fall into the flesh change. But Malkador had a trick up his sleeve, and he had a fragment of their Primarch Magnus, especially the noble fragment of Magnus. See, when Magnus got, just Undertaker spine blasted by Leman Russ on Prospero, and he pledged his soul to Tzeentch and all that, he effectively shattered his soul, and his soul shattered and kind of spread across the stars, right? Like the crystal in Kirby and the Crystal Stars.
Yes.
And see, I got Kirby into a 40K episode. Beat that.
You can easily get Kirby. Kirby
all the fucking horrible final bosses that are chaos demons.
We can't get into a full tangent, but Kirby is full of Eldritch level lore and
all those finals.
It's all over.
Yeah, true. So he took this noble fragment of Magnus and fused it with him, and then went through the process of turning him into this Grey Knight, effectively curing him of this flesh change, because a fragment of a Primarch will in fact do that type of thing. So now you have the first Supreme Grand Master of the chapter, Janus, which is a much easier name to say. Again, being one of its first, founding lords, had done a lot during the scouring. The time when they were kind of pushing all of the traitorous Space Marines back and trying to keep them away and, fight against their newly found chaos tendencies. Some believe that, and again, this is theory crafting, that maybe in some factor when something happened to him that kind of where the fragment of Magnus maybe took hold, and we have a loyalist Magnus somewhere. We don't really know. All we know is that he no longer is the main Grand Master. His shard of Magnus is still out there. But that's when we get into our man, the myth, the legend, Supreme Grandmaster, currently, Kaldor Drago. See, I've thrown this phrase Mary Sue around, right? And really in 40K
or Gary Stu, yeah.
Yes, I mean, we're all about universal phrasings here, dudes.
Very specifically dudes.
But in 40K, we have Kaldor Dragos. And so Kaldor Drago is the Kaldor Drago of the Grey Knights.
So not Khal Drogo, Kaldor Drago. Okay.
Yes, Kaldor Drago.
Hey, that's sick art. I'll tell you that much.
And my man, do I gotta tell you, this guy is a unit.
He appears to be an absolute unit.
Absolutely. He is, he is a weird enigma right now. Okay. He unfortunately is in a bit of a pickle. So when he was in training and all that, his main teacher and, whatnot, they fought this, great Slanesh demon, and it kicked their ass. It killed his teacher, and it just beat the shit out of him, but he survived.
Oh, wow.
And then, sorry. And then he goes through the ranks, climbs up more and more in the Grey Knights, and just trains to just come back, find that demon again, called Umkar the Reborn. Just M''Kar, Umkar. And essentially fight him again.
Yeah.
And he beat him. Oh, and I should know, even prior to that, essentially his training exercises, one of them being fighting Mortarion, who is now a greater demon of Nurgle, and banishing him with his own name, carving his name into his heart, into Mortarion's heart, and that which thus banishing him into the warp. Like solo. He like pulled a let me solo her, except it was let me solo Mortarion.
That's a busy weekend.
Yeah. But yeah, so later on, after that, he found Umkar again, fought them, defeated them, but had a problem. Upon defeating Umkar, was attained a curse upon destroying him. And that curse dragged him into the realm of Slaanesh. Much like the Purple Knight we talked about earlier, except in this scenario, he spent so much time in the realm of Slaanesh and was onslaughted by so many demons that after a while, the demons realized we need to stop sending things to him because he's destroying them so hard, they're not coming back anymore. He's completely eradicating their existence somehow. Because, like, that's the thing. When you kill a demon, it just goes to the warp. So you just remove it from, our plane of existence. But, like, all souls who die go to the warp. So their souls just get recycled. Mm-hmm. But just like, and Grey Knights have done this in general. But he's just erasing these demons. And so they're just finally like, we got to stop. We've lost enough. And so, but what would happen is that he would be seen finding his way back into real space in different times and to help his chapter fight these great incursions. But then after the incursion is over, he would inevitably get dragged back in. And thus you have this kind of perpetual back and forth kind of going on where he's constantly trying to, fight these Slaaneshi demons, but then coming into real space to fight whatever demons are his brothers and, his brothers are fighting, and then trying to go back and fight more demons. So he's a busy guy. But since the Great Rift, he has started to show up more. So some are hoping that maybe he will finally be able to make his proper return into real space. Maybe this will kind of help break that barrier and that thing that is dragging him back into the realm of chaos. He has not stared Slaanesh in the face, though, quite yet. So, but yeah, Khaldor Drago is a fucking insane story. It's awesome in it's like in the way that watching Fast and the Furious is awesome, right? It's just.
Are you suggesting that Vin Diesel should play Khaldor Drago in the Warhammer movie?
That'd be so fucking funny. It's probably going to be a series, but that'd be awesome. And so now we go into probably the part that any Grey Knight fan who's already, at least someone who already is a fan of the Grey Knights and just wanted a fun video about Grey Knights to watch or listen to, is going to come to dread. And that's talking about Grey Knights on the tabletop.
Okay.
And here's the thing. Honestly, if I had to pick like a Space Marine, a type of Space Marine to play on the tabletop, like Loyalist, I'd probably choose Grey Knights. As much as I love like your vanilla Space Marine types, so like, or even that, like maybe like your Salamanders, the Raven Guard, I think from a playstyle point, I would really like the the Grey Knights. But they have one problem in 10th edition right now, and that is their lack of psychicness. And you might be like, but they're the Psychic Space Marine Legion. How could they have very little psychic representation? And that's because when Games Workshop made 10th edition, they removed the phase of the game that was the psychic phase. In 9th and prior, they had a psychic phase. I don't know for how long back, but just at least 9th prior. They had the psychic phase. And in that, they would not only use offensive, attacking psychic powers, but also ones that would maybe sully the field, affect a unit's mind to, make them shoot worse or stuff like that. Or especially in the Grey Knights case, to teleport around, because that's one of their big things, is they move quickly around the battlefield because they utilize their psychic powers to kind of flash teleport around and just be deadly killing machines.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing, is the Grey Knights end up in this scenario where, they're supposed to have all these psychic powers, but they had to change how psychic worked because they got rid of it as a phase. And I wasn't totally against the concept, right? I think putting less phases of a turn, especially one that many of the armies ended up just skipping over, was not the worst idea. But their execution was a problem, especially for the Grey Knights, because the Thousand Sons, the other psychic Space Marine-like army, but for Chaos, got these things called Cabal points, where essentially you would spend these special points and you could do psychic-like things to your enemy. And those were generally things like, affecting their ability to shoot, affecting their ability to defend, making them do this worse, do that worse.
Yeah.
These things that affect the board. And the Grey Knights got the ability to teleport and cast gun, which is just kind of the fun name for like...
That's a good spell.
It would be if they didn't also just have a gun.
That's a good spell.
Like, look, a good example of it is like they have
a lot of these pictures you're showing me, they're clearly casting gun.
Well, that's kind of the point, right? Like the 9th edition Codex cover, right? They don't show any Grey Knights like casting a spell. And again, they like the cast gun joke comes from the fact that, in a data sheet for, a unit, they have their range attacks and their melee attacks. And so under their range attacks would not only be their gun, but like, say like a lightning bolt like attack, like a, Emperor Palpatine level, lightning attack, or the Thousand Sons get something called a Doom Bolt, which again are just like these specifically offensive damaging spells, right? They're just about killing. And that's why it's just like, it doesn't feel like psychic. It feels like it's just a different gun that you've just decided to label as a spell. Right. It's kind of like if you're a wizard and the only thing you could cast was Eldritch Blast. Or, or any spellcaster, right? And the only thing you could cast was Eldritch Blast. It's cool, sure, and it can be versatile and it can be helpful, but there's so many other spells that come in handy for so many things. And it's, again, it's like making a wizard where his only spell somehow is Eldritch Blast.
Well, they did. It's called Warlock, but that doesn't exist in 40K.
Yeah, but even they get extra spells.
Do they, though?
They only get 3 at a time, but they get them on a short rest. And then if you take the homebrew feat Early Riser, which is a good one to add because it makes short rest not stupid sometimes, especially for things like warlocks and fighters, where the short rest is only an hour, it's incredibly useful. Because then they're not useless half the time in their engagements. Digression aside, that's the issue that Grey Knights players feel right now. They feel like they only cast gun. and they don't have their other spells. Their utility is gone. They just have fight and teleport, which is less boring. They also, many of their data sheets also don't really have hammers anymore, which is also kind of dumb because they literally have a unit called paladins. They should have a big hammer. Like, come on, right? Like, it makes sense.
Yeah, that's fair.
But one thing you may have noticed in a lot of the imagery up to this point is that their armor is very much they're kind of essentially almost all kitted out in Terminator armor. Technically, there are Grey Knights who have more standard Space Marine, just slightly bulkier armor, but most of their character units, most of their leading units, and a lot of their units are Terminators. Essentially, the concept is just the newest Grey Knights kind of get more standard armor, and then when they become Paladins and others, they get Terminator armor. This is where that kind of comes from. But yeah, like that's so like that's not to. I will say, like, this is not to say that like you can't win as a Grey Knight or Grey Knights always lose. It's not. The problem isn't that you can't play games with them. It's that a lot of Grey Knights players right now just feel like they're not fitting of the lore. They're not fitting why people want to play Grey Knights. Mm-hmm. And some of the hope is that obviously that would change and that it would get better over time or when their codex comes out. But the problem is there's some theory that potentially that there's going to be this new codex coming out in the summer where it's going to be the Inquisition, and that they're going to lump the Inquisition, Grey Knights, and Death Watch all in the same book. And I really hope, for Grey Knights at least, that it's not the case. I think it's fine to put Death Watch with Inquisition because, again, very normal Space Marine group. It's just a bunch of elite Space Marines, so it's kind of like you honestly could just then have like, an Imperium agent army, or you can have a rogue trader, a noble, or the essentially like the police force of the Imperium called the Arbites, which we won't really get into because they're not a proper faction. We'll touch on them, but not really, not in a full episode. And then the Inquisition agents themselves. And then you have the Death Watch along with them. They feel like a more complete army. But if you make them all then with Grey Knights, because you don't really see like the Death Watch and Grey Knights don't go together on missions. That really doesn't happen in the lore. If it does, it's not often. It's like extremely rare. And so, it wouldn't, to me, make a lot of sense. And I think it would be bad showing if they were to lump the Grey Knights in with the rest of an Inquisition book. So it's kind of partly to see what they will do in the future. But many are somewhat hoping with the current Warhammer Age of Sigmar edition that's being released and the way they're handling psychic powers in that, and spells specifically, because in the fantasy setting, it turns out they flavor them a lot more as spells than just psychic and magic, The hope is, for some people, that they'll flavor it a lot like they're doing it in Age of Sigmar. Because a lot of people have kind of looked at the rules of 4th edition and kind of said, like, this seems like 10th edition, but better. So maybe the hope would be that in the next edition, or maybe they can figure out something in their codex comes out to give them a better army rule or something like that. That would be the hope for them. But like I said, in many things, that is not always going to stay the same. Right? Grey Knights will obviously get their changes. They will change from edition to edition, as every army always does. Mm-hmm. So it's not all doom and gloom. May not even be all doom and gloom for the rest of this, for this edition still. But right now, it's at the time of this recording and at its release, it's going to be a little tough. But from a thematic standpoint, playing wise, you can play just fine. You're not going to lose games. You can still have a fun time. It's just not. It's the flavor. But other than that, I mean, they're still very elite, as we kind of mentioned at the beginning. So they'll have a kind of similar sized army to a Custodes, maybe only like a couple units more. Like you'll maybe run like 6 units and like a couple vehicles, maybe. They do have one of my favorite models in existence. There it is. The Nemesis Dread Knight, otherwise known as the baby carrier. It's just one big gray knight carrying the baby gray knight. Is it Krang?
The turtles.
Turtles. I'll defeat chaos with my giant power weapon. So yeah, I love the Nemesis Dread Knight. It's so goofy, but I love it because it's also just cool. It's goofy but cool at the same time.
Sure.
And it's been a pretty solid set piece of the army, but as of late, but you'll maybe have like one of these and maybe another vehicle and then like 5 infantry units or something like that, and that'll like round your army, where like you'll have double that. Mm-hmm. All of that in like a Space Marine army, right? Or at least maybe another army, something like that, right? Like they are more elite. They're that kind of middle ground of eliteness between the Space Marine level of elite and the Custodes. They're kind of that middle point. And yeah, that is about it on the Grey Knights. They are here. They're ready to fight demons. And not make sure you never hear about it ever again.
Distribution of swords is no proper way of forming a government. All right, Monty Python told us this years and years ago, and I feel like it's the same thing with the Grey Knights. Everybody at home, stop taking weapons from Slaanesh. Don't do it. Don't even do it under the pretense of like, yeah, I'll just hold on to it and I'll only use it some of the time because, if I used it all the time, well, that would be bad. So I'll only use it a little bit. Like, that's not how it works.
I mean, look, Castellan Crowe is making it work. Look at him.
He's making it work like WERK, but like, I can't imagine it,
I mean, he's been holding this.
For him.
I mean, he's been holding this for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Probably hundreds of years at this point.
Yeah.
I have to imagine. From when we first seen him to now, the many things have gone down in the lore. So I have full faith in Castellan Crowe.
You believe in Castellan Crowe?
I do, absolutely. Look, the Grey Knights are special. They are they're incorruptible. The only sign of them the only supposed sign of them supposedly potentially falling is that one Grey Knight that went to face Slaanesh head on. And still went to that throne and said, "Fight me." Like, for all we know, they just lost.
Yeah.
And then they're just getting puppeted. So they're not even there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That's the big thing. So, yeah, I think, there's a lot to be said for the Grey Knights, mental will. They get the pass.
Their fortitude, their mental fortitude.
Yeah. And they get the pass,
They get the pass.
They get the chaos pass.
Oh, okay.
No, not that pass.
I was like, what? Where'd that come from? No, I'll admit, I think they're pretty cool too.
Yeah, I mean they really have, like, they obviously have their sordid history, much like the rest of the Imperium and all of the, I mean, really all of the, almost all of the factions of 40K.
Yeah.
But, you know, one way or another, like, they understand the true threat that chaos poses. And while, you know, yeah, you don't always want to, you know, you don't want to commit genocide on a bunch of people because they learned what a demon is, you know, at least, especially at the time, in the smaller scenarios. So like where maybe it was just like mind wiping, you know, like Men in Black style, just mind wiping people, or like maybe it's just like this one unit didn't return from the mission. Like, yeah, it's not great, but to then to stop the perpetual or the potential chance, because even just being like momentarily weak to like a chaos demon whispering in your ear can allow for like 12 demons to just spring from your body. Like they get an access point, they shove the rest of it open. You open that door a crack, they pound it through.
Give it an inch, they take a mile.
Exactly. So they do, there is a good understanding that, like, unfortunately in the grimdark future, chaos is not to be fucked with, except if you're a Grey Knight. Then they'll fucks with them. And that'll do it for the Grey Knights.
All right, cool.
Next week, we're going to hit the double feature video. We're going to go to a Xenos, but then we're going to do double Xenos. Truly heretical now. We talked
All
about
the way
Grey
across
Knights.
the void.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Grey Knights and live. And then we're going to talk about Xenos twice in a row.
Mm-hmm.
But that's because we're going full Eldar for the next 2 episodes.
Ooh.
We're going to start with them craft worlders, and then we're going to go to those depraved sons of bitches in Kamara, in the Drukhari. And in the middle, between both of them, a little sprinkle around of 2 episodes. That linking point will be our Ynnari and Harlequins. Mostly Harlequins will be in both. Mostly Ynnari will be in the Craft World episode, but we'll get to that. We'll get to why. You gotta tune in those episodes to find out, though. What do the space elves got up their sleeves? Those tricky bastards. Otherwise, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
Farewell.